She ran like the building was on fire. Evening gown shredded at the hem, mascara tracking black lines down her face, heels long gone. Isabella Sterling, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, was sprinting barefoot across cold concrete in an underground parking garage, and the men chasing her weren't security guards gone rogue. They were professionals. They moved like wolves, and they were gaining on her. She had 6 seconds before they reached her. She chose a stranger. If you're the kind of person who stays until the very last second of a story, subscribe to this channel right now, hit the like button, and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Every comment tells me you're out there, and every view tells me to keep going. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next will make you forget you were ever tired. The garage on West Kinsey smelled like motor oil, old concrete, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists at 11:40 at night in a part of the city that doesn't get foot traffic. 3 of the overhead fluorescents had been flickering for a week and a half. Cole Mercer kept meaning to replace them, kept finding other things to do first. The 4th light buzzed steadily above the service bay where he was lying on a creeper beneath a 2019 Ram 1500 with a transmission issue that had been annoying him for 2 days. He heard the footsteps before he saw anything. Not the kind of footsteps that belonged to someone lost and looking for their car. These were frantic, slapping against concrete, echoing off the low ceiling, too fast and too desperate. He slid out from under the truck and sat up. She came through the side entrance at a full run. The gown had been expensive once, dark green, formal, the kind of dress that belongs at charity fundraisers and board dinners. Now the left side was torn from the hem to mid-thigh, and the woman wearing it was running barefoot with one strap hanging off her shoulder. She didn't see Cole until she was 15 feet away, and when she finally registered another human being standing in the garage, she didn't slow down. She aimed straight for him. Please. That was all she got out before she crashed into him, grabbing 2 fists of his work shirt, nearly pulling them both off balance. Please, there are men. They're right behind me. I don't have a phone. I don't have anything. Cole caught her by both arms. She was breathing so hard she could barely finish a sentence. How many? He said. She blinked. She'd expected him to ask what was happening, or to tell her to calm down. The directness of the question seemed to knock something loose in her brain. 4, she said. Maybe 5. I lost count when I went through the stairwell. Cole looked past her at the side entrance. Nothing yet. Armed? Yet 2 of them had... I saw something under their jackets. When they grabbed my arm at the event, I felt... She stopped, swallowed. Yes, armed. He didn't let go of her arms. Can you run or are you done? I'm done, she said, and he believed her. Her feet were bleeding. Cole pulled her sideways toward the tool bay in the far corner, the one blocked from the entrance by a Chevy Silverado he'd been holding for parts. He hit the main lights on the way, not all of them. Just the 2 farthest from the entrance, so the service bay went mostly dark. He placed her behind him against the rear wall, beside a rolling cabinet that would give her some cover. Don't move, he said. Don't make noise. Who are you? She asked. Right now, the only person between you and them. He picked up a half-inch breaker bar from the cabinet beside him. Not because he planned to use it, but because holding something stopped some people from doing something stupid. Old habit. After that, we can do introductions. She pressed back against the wall. They came through the same door she had. 3 of them, which meant 2 were still outside or had taken another route. They moved professionally, spread out, not clustered, checking angles as they entered rather than rushing in together. Cole watched from behind the truck. These weren't hired muscle from some local operation. They had training, not military, but close. Private security, serious money, good instruction. He waited. The first one swept left with a flashlight. The beam moved across the Silverado's hood and kept going, not catching the shadow where Cole stood. The second went right, toward the elevator bank. The third came straight up the middle, slower than the other 2, more deliberate. The deliberate one stopped about 20 feet from the Chevy. Mercer, he said. Cole's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The man with the flashlight turned toward the sound of his colleague's voice. So did the one by the elevators. They were pulling together now, which was either caution or recognition. Cole Mercer, the man said again. Not a question. We know you're in here. We saw her come in. He paused. This isn't your business. Give her to us, and you go back to whatever you were doing. Nobody wants a problem with you." The woman behind Cole made a small sound. He turned just slightly and shook his head. The man in the middle hadn't drawn his weapon. That was interesting. Cole stepped out from behind the truck. He was still holding the breaker bar. He was wearing a gray Henley with a grease stain on the right sleeve, work jeans, and steel-toed boots that needed resoling. His hair was cut close on the sides and had been doing whatever it wanted on top for the past 3 weeks. He looked like exactly what he was supposed to look like, a mechanic who'd been working late. He looked at all three of them once, slowly, the way someone looks at a math problem they already know the answer to. "You said my name," Cole said. "That means you know who I am, which means you already know my answer." The one on the left tightened his grip on his flashlight. His partner near the elevator shifted his weight. The one in the middle, the deliberate one, didn't move. He studied Cole for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he took a half step back. "Your call," Cole said. "But you came into my building." The pause that followed was about 4 seconds. Cole counted. Then the one in the middle said something under his breath to the other two. Cole didn't catch the words. And all three of them backed toward the exit. The flashlight went off. The door opened. They were gone. Cole stood there in the dark garage and listened to the sound of them leaving. Footsteps getting further. A door somewhere at the far end of the structure opening and closing. He waited 2 more minutes. Then he walked back to the rear wall. She was standing exactly where he'd left her, one hand pressed flat against the tool cabinet. The adrenaline was starting to wear off. He could see it in the way her legs weren't quite steady. She was staring at him with an expression that sat somewhere between relief and something much more complicated. "They left," she said. "For now." "Why did they leave?" Her voice was sharper now that she wasn't running. "You didn't do anything. You just stood there. They saw you and they left." Cole set the breaker bar down on the cabinet. "You want to sit down? Your feet are bleeding." "I want to know who you are." "Cole Mercer. I own this place." He moved toward the small office at the back of the bay. "Come on, I've got a first aid kit, and there might be coffee left if it hasn't turned into tar." She didn't move immediately. He could feel her eyes on his back. "Isabella Sterling," she said. He stopped. He turned around slowly. She was watching him with the careful attention of someone who was used to reading rooms, reading people, making fast decisions about who could be trusted and how much. She had blood on her feet and streaked mascara and one strap falling off her shoulder, and she was standing in a way that said she hadn't survived this long by accident. "I know who you are," Cole said. "Then you know this is bigger than a bad night at a fundraiser." "Yeah." He paused. "Come sit down, Ms. Sterling. We need to check you for a tracker." That landed the way he knew it would. Her expression shifted. Confusion first, then alarm. "A tracker," she repeated. "Someone knew where to find you tonight. Either they had eyes on the event, which is possible, or they knew your route, which is possible. But the speed at which those three showed up in this garage suggests they were tracking you directly." He nodded toward the office. "That dress. Your jewelry. Your shoes. Where are your shoes?" "I left them when I ran, in the stairwell." "Okay. Was there anything else? A bag? A bracelet? Anything you picked up tonight that you don't usually carry?" She thought about it. He watched her face while she did, not searching for deception, just watching the process. She wasn't panicking. He respected that. "My clutch," she said. "Someone handed it to me at the event. It was one of the servers. He said the foundation's event coordinator had left it for me. I thought it was my table assignment." She looked down. She was still holding it, a small, dark green evening clutch, barely large enough to hold a lipstick. "I never even opened it." "Give it to me." She hesitated for exactly 1 second, then she held it out. Cole took it to the workbench, snapped on the light above, and opened it. Inside, a folded card, a lip gloss, and tucked into the satin pocket on the interior wall, a small black rectangle about the size of a thick guitar pick. He didn't touch it with his fingers. He used a rag from the bench and lifted it out. Commercial-grade GPS transmitter. Updated every 30 seconds. Battery life around 48 hours. "Is that—" she started. "Yes." He wrapped it in the rag, walked it to the far corner of the garage, and placed it behind a tire rack beside a drain. "They can track it to this address, but they already know this address. Moving it inside buys nothing." He He came back. There are 2 more men outside, possibly watching the building. We need to move. Move where? My shop. The actual shop, not this garage. 3 blocks north. He was already moving, pulling his jacket off a hook near the office door. A plain gray canvas jacket, nothing remarkable, and checking his pockets by habit. Keys, phone. That was all he ever needed. You have 2 locations? This is the towing yard. The repair shop is separate. He looked at her feet. Can you walk 3 blocks on concrete? She glanced down. I don't have a choice, do I? There's always a choice. I can also get the truck and drive. But if those 2 men outside have comms with the 3 that just left, they know what my truck looks like. We walk, she said. He nodded. He handed her the canvas jacket without comment. It would cover the torn dress. She pulled it on without arguing, which told him she was smart enough to prioritize staying alive over being uncomfortable about accepting things from strangers. They went out the back, through the service exit, not the entrance, and into the alley that ran parallel to Kinsey. Cole went first. He checked both ends of the alley from the doorway before he let her follow. The night was cold enough to see breath. She followed close, stepping carefully, and he set a pace she could match without running. She was quiet for most of it. That surprised him. He'd expected questions. He'd expected the kind of person who runs a billion-dollar company to fill silence with words, to want control of the situation through talking. Instead, she watched the street, watched the corners, watched the windows above them the same way he did. Not trained instinct, something else, something she'd learned the hard way. They were half a block from the shop when she spoke. The man in the middle, she said, the one who told the others to leave. What about him? He was scared, not of you specifically, of the idea of you. Like he recognized a category of person and decided it wasn't worth it. Cole didn't answer. That's not how people react to mechanics, she said. People react differently to different things. She stopped walking. He stopped too, turned around. Mr. Mercer, she said, I need to know if I can trust you. Not because I have options. I clearly don't have options tonight. But because what I have to tell you is the kind of thing that gets people killed. It's already gotten 2 people killed that I know of, possibly more that I don't. She met his eyes directly. So I need to know what I'm dealing with. Cole looked at her for a moment. There was something exhausting about being seen, even partially. He'd built this life, the towing yard, the shop, the small apartment above it, the routine of early mornings and engine trouble and getting his daughter to her classes on time, specifically so that he would not be seen, so that no one would ask him questions that required honest answers. You can trust me, he said. I'm not going to tell you why tonight, but you'll know by morning. She studied him. Then she started walking again. The repair shop was locked, dark, and smelled like rubber and WD-40. Cole got the lights on in the small break room at the back. A table, 4 chairs, a couch that had seen better decades. A coffee maker that was newer than everything else because his daughter had bought it for him last birthday. He got the kit from the cabinet under the sink and handed it to her. There's a bathroom through that door, he said. Water, towels. I'll get coffee going. You're very calm, she said. I've had practice. He was measuring coffee into the filter when she came back out, feet wrapped in gauze and medical tape. The canvas jacket hung on the back of a chair. She sat down at the table and folded her hands in front of her and looked at him the way someone looks when they've made a decision and are about to test it. Sterling Horizon runs contracts with the federal government, she said. Infrastructure, supply chain logistics, procurement. About 4 months ago, I found discrepancies in the audit trail for 3 separate contracts. I thought it was accounting error at first. It wasn't. She paused. Someone has been using our federal contracts as a mechanism to launder money. Not small amounts, not rounding errors. She exhaled. $612 million over 7 years. Cole set the coffee maker going and turned around. That's not a hostile takeover, he said. No, she said. That's what I thought it was at first. I thought someone was trying to remove me to take control of the company. But when I started tracing the money, tracing where it actually went, she pressed both hands flat on the table. It went to judges, federal procurement officials, 2 sitting senators, 3 private security firms that I have reason to believe are fronts. She looked up at him. The people chasing me tonight aren't worried about Sterling Horizon. They're worried about what I know and what I can prove. The coffee maker started making noise. Cole pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Where's the evidence?" he said. "Secure server. Off-site. The access credentials are—" She stopped, looked at him differently. "Why do you want to know where the evidence is?" "Because right now, that evidence is the only reason you're still alive," he said. "Which means it's also the reason someone is going to keep trying to get to you. And how we protect it depends on where it is and how accessible it is." She leaned back in the chair. Something shifted in her expression. Not distrust exactly, but a recalculation. "You know," she said quietly, "most people, when they hear that someone is being chased by armed men connected to federal corruption and $500 million in fraud, most people run the other way. Most people," Cole said, "haven't already spent 5 years trying to build a case against the same network and watched it go nowhere." The room was very still. Isabella Sterling stared at him. Outside, somewhere down the block, a car passed slowly. Cole didn't move. He watched her process what he'd just said, watched the pieces rearrange themselves behind her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked again. The same question she'd asked in the garage, but she meant something completely different now. Cole reached over and poured 2 mugs of coffee. He slid one across the table to her. "Someone who should have finished this a long time ago," he said. And somewhere in the building above them, his daughter's alarm was set for 6:30, and she had no idea that the man who made her breakfast every morning had just invited the most dangerous problem in the city to sit at their table and drink coffee. The coffee went cold before either of them touched it. That was the thing about conversations that split your sense of reality down the middle. You forgot about small things. You forgot that cups needed drinking, and that time was still moving, and that somewhere outside, men with weapons were adjusting their plan because the simple extraction they'd been sent to do had just gotten complicated. Isabella sat with both hands around the mug anyway, not drinking, just holding something warm while Cole talked. He didn't tell her everything. He told her enough. 2017, he said. "I was running a classified joint task force through Naval Intelligence and the DOJ. 5 people total, none of us officially connected on paper. The target was a procurement fraud network that had been bleeding federal contracts for almost a decade." He turned the mug in front of him in slow half circles, a habit he wasn't aware of. "We had names, we had wire transfers, we had 2 witnesses who were willing to testify." He stopped turning the mug. "And then my wife got sick, stage 4. Diagnosis to funeral was 11 weeks. Isabella didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that. People said they were sorry and it never meant anything, not because they didn't mean it, but because sorry was just the word people reached for when they didn't know what else to do. "I stepped away from the task force," he said. "My daughter was 16. She needed a parent who was actually present, not one that was chasing ghosts across 3 federal agencies while she was learning to grieve. I handed off everything I had, every file, every contact, every lead, to my handler at DOJ, and I came back to Chicago and I opened a repair shop. And the investigation? Died. Officially, the task force was dissolved due to insufficient evidence, which was a lie. We had sufficient evidence. What we didn't have was anyone willing to push it forward once I was gone." He finally picked up the mug, drank, made a face. "Cold. What was the network called?" "We called it Harrow. It didn't have a formal name. These things rarely do. It was structured as a series of overlapping shells. A private security firm handles procurement for a federal infrastructure project. A portion of the contract value gets diverted through a subcontractor that exists on paper only. The money moves twice, maybe 3 times. Then it ends up in accounts connected to judges, officials, political committees." He set the mug down. "It's not creative. It's just large enough and distributed enough that any single agency looking at any single piece of it sees nothing unusual." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Harrow," she said. "That's what I found inside Sterling Horizon's contracts." She wasn't asking. "Tell me what you found exactly." So she did. She talked for almost 40 minutes. Cole listened the way he used to listen during briefings, without interrupting, tracking names and numbers, noting the places where information was thin and the places where it was solid. Isabella Sterling had not stumbled into this. She'd been thorough in a way that most people with her resources and her time pressures weren't. She'd noticed a discrepancy in a line item on a contract audit in January, thought it was an accounting error, flagged it internally, and then gotten suspicious when the internal flag came back cleared within 6 hours. 6 hours was too fast. So instead of pushing it up through her own system, she'd hired an outside forensic auditor privately, paid for out of her personal accounts, and told no one inside the company. What the auditor found took 3 months to document. 7 years of contract fraud, $612 million. Sterling Horizon had been used as a vehicle, not by its own leadership originally, but by individuals embedded within its procurement and compliance divisions who had connections to the Harrow network. People who had been placed inside the company over years, gradually, the way you'd plant slow-growing things in soil. The two people who were killed, Cole said. Who were they? Her jaw tightened. The first was my auditor, Marcus Fenn. He was killed in what was ruled a traffic accident 6 weeks ago. His car went off the Eisenhower overpass. He was alone, 3 in the morning, no other vehicles involved. She met Cole's eyes. Marcus didn't drink. He didn't drive late at night. He took the train. And the second? A woman named Carla Ibsen. She was a compliance officer, mid-level, had been with the company 8 years. I think she noticed something independently and didn't know who to bring it to. She died of an apparent overdose in her apartment 2 weeks ago. Isabella's voice didn't break, but something in it went very flat. She had a 7-year-old daughter. Cole said nothing for a moment. You've had this information for months, he said finally. Why didn't you go to the FBI? I tried. The flatness in her voice shifted to something harder. I made discreet contact with an agent I believed to be trustworthy. A week later, I was informed through my attorney that federal investigators had opened a preliminary inquiry into my financial conduct. She tilted her head. Someone inside that office told them I'd been in contact. That was my warning. So they've got reach inside the bureau. At minimum, one person, possibly more. She leaned back in the chair. I've been trying to find a safe path to the evidence for 8 weeks. Tonight was supposed to be different. I had an arrangement to meet someone at that event. Someone I thought could help me move the records to a secure intermediary. Instead, I walked into the event and my own security detail tried to detain me. She said it like it still hadn't fully processed. My own people, men I'd worked with for 2 years. They were already turned. Yes, or replaced. I don't know which. She rubbed the side of her face. I ran. That's all I did. I just ran. Cole stood up and walked to the window that faced the back alley. He pulled the blind an inch to the side and looked out. The alley was empty. The street beyond it had the sparse late-night traffic of a Chicago neighborhood that was mostly industrial on this block. Not much cover for surveillance, but not much exposure either. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. A text from his daughter. His daughter, you alive? Heard something in the yard. He typed back. Everything's fine. Don't come down. Go back to sleep. 3 dots appeared. Then, Dad. Then nothing else. She knew better than to push when he said don't come down, and he hated that she knew that. He hated that there was a version of him that his 19-year-old had learned to read correctly. He put the phone face down. You live above the shop? Isabella asked. Yeah. Your daughter is up there. She lives with me. She goes to DePaul, studies architecture. He said it in a way that wasn't really an invitation to continue the subject. Isabella heard the edge. She didn't push it. We can't stay here, Cole said. If they track the clutch to the garage, they know the general area. It won't take long to connect that garage to this address. He turned away from the window. And by morning, this is going to look different anyway. What do you mean? I mean that these people don't just send men with guns. That's the blunt instrument. The sharper one is what comes after, when they stop chasing you physically and start working the other levers. He pulled his jacket off the chair back and checked his phone. We need to check something. He opened a browser, searched her name. The first result was a Reuters wire that had gone up 47 minutes ago. He turned the phone so she could read it. The headline was, Sterling Horizon CEO Isabella Sterling sought for questioning in federal embezzlement investigation. She stared at it. Keep reading, he said, though he already knew what it said. She scrolled. Her face didn't crumple. It went still, which was worse. The article cited anonymous federal sources claiming that internal Sterling Horizon documents showed the CEO had personally authorized the diversion of contract funds. It mentioned frozen accounts. It mentioned that she had failed to appear for a scheduled federal interview that evening, the event she had actually been attending when her own security team tried to grab her. The framing was clean, precise, and completely inverted. She wasn't the person who found the fraud. According to this, she was the person who ran the fraud. They moved fast, she said. They had this ready. This was already written. They were just waiting for the right moment to release it. She set the phone on the table very carefully. My assets. Probably frozen. My board will convene an emergency session. They're required to under our corporate charter when... She stopped, breathed. They'll remove me. They have the votes to do it if the chairman calls for it, and he will. He's been waiting for a reason. Who's the chairman? Warren Aldrich. He's been on the board for 11 years. He was there before I was CEO. She said the name the way you say the name of someone you trusted once. I never had any concrete reason to suspect him. But looking back, she pressed 2 fingers to her temple. He facilitated 3 of the procurement relationships that turned out to be part of this. He introduced those people to the company. I thought it was just board-level networking. Cole was already thinking forward, the way he'd been trained to, laying the situation out in his head like a terrain map. The immediate problem was physical safety. The medium-term problem was evidence. She had it, but accessing it now would be dangerous, and the window for using it was narrowing fast. The long-term problem was that she was being positioned as the criminal, and every hour that framing held was an hour that made the truth harder to hear. The evidence, he said. The records your auditor compiled before he died. Where are they? He sent me a secure backup 3 days before he died. I don't think he knew he was in danger. I think he was just being careful. The files are on an encrypted server. She hesitated. But there's physical documentation too. Original contract printouts, annotated, with Marcus's handwriting. He kept a hard copy. His instructions, in the event something happened to him, were to check a specific location. Where? She looked at him for a long moment. How do I know, she said carefully, that you telling me you were part of an investigation into this network doesn't just mean you're one more person inside it, trying to find out where my evidence is? Cole held her gaze. He didn't look away, didn't look insulted, didn't rush to reassure her. He just waited. That's a legitimate concern, he said. You'd be stupid not to ask it. So answer it. I can't prove anything to you tonight. I can tell you that if I wanted your evidence, I'd have let those men take you in the garage and followed up through other means. I can tell you that I've got a daughter asleep 20 feet above us who I would very much like to keep safe, which means I have strong personal motivation to not be involved in something that would bring that kind of attention to this address. He paused. And I can tell you that the last time I had evidence against this network, someone made sure it went nowhere. I'd like a different outcome this time. She studied him. This was a woman who read people for a living, not the way therapists did, but the way executives did, which was faster and less forgiving and more about pattern recognition than empathy. Okay, she said, just that. No speech, no further conditions. Okay, Cole said. We need to move. Not far, but somewhere with better options than this. He pushed back from the table. And we need to talk about what the next 72 hours look like, because right now is when most people in your position make decisions they can't walk back. What kind of decisions? The panicked kind. Running to someone they think they can trust without verifying, trying to go public before the evidence is secured, contacting a lawyer who has connections they're not aware of. He looked at her directly. You need to go dark. Completely. No contact with anyone from your previous life until we know who's clean and who isn't. Something in her posture shifted. Not resistance exactly. More like the adjustment a person makes when they realize someone else is going to be driving for a while and they haven't fully made peace with that. I don't take direction well, she said. It wasn't bragging. It was a warning. Noted. He picked up his keys. I don't explain myself well, so we're already even. They went out through the back. Cole took her 3 blocks west and 1 block south to a building he owned that wasn't registered under his name. Technically belonged to a small LLC he'd set up years ago for exactly the kind of eventuality where he needed somewhere that wasn't connected to anything. It wasn't nice. It was a 2-room space above a laundry that had been closed for a year, with a working bathroom and a space heater, and a cot with a sleeping bag and a folding table with a chair. He'd kept it because old habits were hard to kill, and because his daughter had been right when she said once that her father was the kind of person who always had a plan B even when plan A was going fine. He got the space heater going and handed her a clean sweatshirt from the duffel he kept there. "This is your emergency apartment," Isabella said, looking around at it. "It's a room. Do you always have an emergency room? Don't you?" He set the duffel on the table and unzipped it. Inside, a change of clothes, a basic med kit, a prepaid phone still in its packaging, $2,000 in cash, and a legal pad notebook. Standard. He'd refreshed it 6 months ago out of habit. "I have a 6,000 square foot penthouse in River North," she said, "which I currently cannot go back to." "Then you should have had an emergency room." She let out a short, involuntary laugh, the kind that surprises people when it comes out of them during a bad situation. It was gone quickly, but it was real. He noted it. She pulled on the sweatshirt. It was 3 sizes too large and had a faded Northwestern logo on the chest that had been washed so many times it was barely legible. She sat on the edge of the cot. "Tell me about the task force," she said. "The one in 2017. How far did you actually get?" Cole pulled the folding chair out and sat facing her, far enough to know the shape of it. Harrow wasn't organized as a criminal enterprise from the top. It evolved from relationships. People who scratched each other's backs inside government procurement, who found that the scratching was worth money, who brought in more people who could provide cover. By the time we were tracking it, it had tentacles in 4 federal agencies, 2 state-level judicial appointments, and at least 3 private security contractors that we identified. Which contractors? Vantage Solutions, a firm called Meridian Risk Partners, and a third one that operated under a few different names. We knew it as Crestfall. Isabella went very still. Crestfall, she said. "You know it." Crestfall Security Consulting is one of my company's vendors. They handle physical security assessments for 3 of our federal contract sites. She looked like she was running numbers in her head. "They were recommended by Warren Aldrich." Of course they were. Cole pressed the heels of both hands against his knees and thought about the particular grim satisfaction of being right about something you wish you were wrong about. "They put people inside your company," he said. "Not just your security detail, your vendor relationships, your compliance team, maybe your IT infrastructure. This has been a long-term operation." "How long?" "Based on what you told me about the 7-year money trail, they started positioning themselves inside Sterling Horizon around the same time my task force was getting close in 2017. When the task force dissolved, they had space to move. They used your company's federal contracts as the next vehicle." He looked at her. "You didn't bring this on yourself, but you did inherit it." She took that in without flinching. "I should have seen it sooner," she said. "Maybe, but they were good." "That's not actually comforting." "It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be accurate." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not quite frustration. Something more like the feeling you get when you ask for honesty and then realize you'd gotten so used to people managing your feelings that honesty has an unfamiliar texture. "You don't soften things," she said. "Not usually. Does that bother you?" "I don't know yet." She lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling, which had a water stain in the far corner shaped vaguely like the state of Florida. "What I know is that by morning, my face will be on every news platform in the country as an embezzler. My board will convene within 24 hours. My accounts are frozen. My building isn't safe. My security team is compromised." She counted these things off without melodrama, just tallying damage. "And the only person currently in my corner is a mechanic who apparently used to run federal intelligence operations and keeps a secret apartment above a laundromat. I also make decent coffee," Cole said. "When it doesn't go cold." She almost smiled. "Didn't quite make it, but almost." "The physical evidence," Cole said, bringing them back. "Marcus Fenn's hard copies. Where did he say to look?" She sat up again, reached for the sweatshirt's front pocket out of habit, then remembered it wasn't hers. "A storage unit in Evanston. He gave me the number and the access code in a letter he sent to my personal P.O. box, the box he knew about, not the company address. He said if anything ever happened to him, that's where the originals would be." "When did you get the letter?" 4 days after he died." "Have you been to the unit?" "No, I was still trying to figure out who I could trust." Cole nodded. He understood that particular paralysis, the moment when every option has a possible hidden risk, and inaction starts to feel like the only safe choice. It wasn't safe. It was just slower damage. "We'll go tomorrow," he said, "early, before the news cycle fully turns. You'll look different by morning." He glanced at her. "We'll figure something out." "I'm not wearing a disguise," she said immediately. "I was thinking more along the lines of different clothes and not announcing your name, but whatever makes you feel better." "I said I don't take direction well." "And I said I noted it." They looked at each other across the small room. Two people who had been making decisions alone for a long time, suddenly having to figure out how to make them together. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't the beginning of something easy. It was the kind of necessary friction that happens when two people who are both used to being the one in charge end up with no real choice but to share that ground. "Get some sleep," Cole said. He stood, picked up his jacket. "I'm going to make a sweep of the block and check on my daughter. I'll be back before 4. "You're leaving?" "For an hour, maybe less." She didn't like it. He could see that clearly, but she also wasn't going to tell him what to do. "There's a folding knife in the outside pocket of the duffel," he said. "If someone comes through that door, the bathroom has a window that opens onto the alley. Drop to the dumpster, not the ground." She stared at him. "Drop to the dumpster." "It's full. Should cushion. You've thought about this a lot." "Old habit." He was at the door. "Lock it after me. Both locks." He was halfway into the hallway when she spoke. "Cole." He stopped. She never said his first name before this. It had always been the formal address, the careful distance of strangers. "Why did you really leave the task force? You said it was your daughter. I believe you. But there's something else." He stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame. "The 2 witnesses we had," he said, "I made them a promise that they'd be protected, that their cooperation would stay confidential, that we'd get them and their families clear before anything went public." He didn't turn around. "When I left, those promises went with me. I wasn't there to keep them." He paused. "One of them made it, got relocated. The other one," he stopped. "The other one didn't. The other one—" The hallway was quiet. "So you're not just here because she ran into your garage," Isabella said. Not a question. "No," Cole said. "I'm not just here for that." He went downstairs and the door locked behind him with 2 distinct clicks. And somewhere above the city, the night was moving toward morning faster than either of them were ready for, carrying all its damage with it, like things always do. He was back before 4, as promised. Isabella heard his footsteps on the stairs. She'd been lying on the cot, not sleeping, listening to the buildings settle and the distant sound of traffic on the main street and the particular silence of a city that never goes completely quiet. She'd been running numbers in her head. Timelines, names, the order in which everything had fallen apart, and the speed at which it was still falling. Cole came in with 2 paper cups from somewhere and a plastic bag that turned out to contain a change of clothes, dark jeans, a plain long-sleeve shirt, a gray zip-up, all women's sizing, approximately correct. "My daughter," he said, before she could ask. I explained enough. She didn't ask more than that. Isabella looked at the clothes. "She's going to want an explanation eventually." "She always does." He set the cups on the folding table. "She's also 23 years smarter than me, so she'll figure most of it out before I finish the first sentence." He sat down. "How are your feet?" "Fine, sore." She swung her legs over the edge of the cot and sat up. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little. Couple hours on the couch downstairs." He didn't look like he'd slept. He looked like someone who'd spent the dark hours thinking hard and had come out the other side with a plan, which was slightly different from rested but more useful. "We need to talk about Evanston before we go." "Talk about what?" "The unit. If they've already identified Marcus Fenn as your auditor, and by now they'll know about his personal effects, his storage unit if it's registered in his name. We need to assume we're not the only people who know it exists." Isabella pulled the paper cup toward her. Coffee, black. She drank it. "So we might be walking into something." "We might be walking into something," he confirmed. "And we're going anyway. That evidence is the only thing that can actually stop this. Not slow it down, stop it. Without the hard copies, the encrypted backup is useful, but it's one source. Fenn's annotated originals with his handwriting, his methodology documented. That's the difference between something a good lawyer can argue against and something that holds in court. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We're going anyway. She nodded. That was all. They left at 5:40 in the morning in Cole's second vehicle. Not the towing truck, not the work van, but a plain 10-year-old Civic he kept registered under the LLC, nothing remarkable about it in any direction. Isabella wore those borrowed clothes and had her hair pulled back and wore a pair of glasses she didn't need, the simple frames Cole had found in the duffel's front pocket. Not prescription, just the kind of low-grade visual barrier that makes people's faces harder to recognize on surveillance cameras when combined with the right angle. She'd put them on without argument, which surprised him. Then she'd looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and said flatly, I look like a graduate student who's made bad decisions. And he'd said, good. And she'd accepted that. The drive to Evanston took 22 minutes at that hour. Cole took surface streets instead of the highway, cut through neighborhoods, doubled back once through a commercial area to check the mirror. Nothing followed them that he could see. That didn't mean nothing was there. It meant nothing obvious was there, which was a different thing. The storage facility was on a long industrial block south of the downtown area. Fenn had rented the unit under a name that wasn't his own, a detail Isabella only knew because his letter had mentioned it, along with the unit number and a 6-digit code. The facility had a gate keypad and a night access policy. At 5 in the morning, there was no attendant, just cameras. Cole studied the camera positions from the car before they got out. There are 4, he said. Gate, main entrance, East Corridor Junction, and one at the far end. The unit number she gave you. What row is it? West Side, row C. West Side doesn't have coverage from the East Corridor camera. Gate camera catches faces. Keep your head angled down, chin level with your collarbone, not lower. Lower looks deliberate. Chin level with collarbone, not lower. You want me to show you, or are you? I have it. They went in. The code worked. The unit was a standard 10 by 10, the kind with a roll-up metal door that makes noise when it opens. Cole moved it slowly and caught the bottom before it could bang. Inside, moving boxes, a bicycle frame with no wheels, a set of golf clubs, a filing cabinet pushed to the back left corner. It smelled like dust, and that particular dry storage smell that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Cole pulled the filing cabinet open. 3 drawers. The top 2 held what they looked like. Old tax documents, some household files. The 3rd drawer was locked. Code? He said. He didn't give me one for the drawer. Cole crouched and looked at the lock mechanism. Simple 4-pin cabinet lock. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and came out with a small leather case. Isabella watched him work the lock without asking what he was doing or where he'd gotten the case. 40 seconds. The drawer came open. Inside were 2 accordion folders, thick with paper, held closed with elastic bands, and a small digital recorder taped to the inside back of the drawer with a sticky note attached. For whoever finds this. I'm sorry it got this far. Isabella reached for the recorder. Cole caught her wrist. Not hard. Just a stop. Gloves, he said. He had 2 pairs of thin latex gloves in his jacket pocket. He gave her one. She pulled them on and picked up the recorder. She pressed play. Marcus Fenn's voice came out of the small speaker, slightly compressed by the recording quality, very much alive in the way recorded voices are both comforting and terrible. He had a measured, deliberate way of speaking, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd spent years turning chaos into organized columns of numbers. If you're listening to this, the worst case happened. I want to state clearly, and for the record, this is Marcus Fenn, forensic auditor, recording this on March 14th. I was hired privately by Isabella Sterling, CEO of Sterling Horizon Corporation, to examine anomalies in the company's federal procurement contracts. What I found was systematic fraud spanning 7 years and involving entities I did not expect, and which I believe present serious danger to anyone investigating them. The financial records in the accordion folders document 3 primary channels of fund diversion, with annotated analysis, identifying 17 individuals directly connected to the movement of funds. I am specifically naming Warren Aldrich, board chairman of Sterling Horizon, as a central coordinator. I am also naming a federal official whose name appears in transfer documentation as a recipient. His name is Richard Betrayal, Deputy Director of Procurement Oversight at the DOJ. Cole went very still. I became aware 3 days ago that I was being followed. I don't believe I have much time. Isabella, if it's you hearing this, I'm sorry I couldn't finish it properly. Everything you need is in the folders. Get it to someone you trust completely. I don't think that person is inside any government agency. I think you'll have to find someone outside. The recording ended. The storage unit was quiet. Somewhere in the building, a ventilation system hummed. Betrayal, Cole said. His voice had a quality Isabella hadn't heard in it before. Something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was maybe the thing that lives between the two when you've suspected something for a long time and finally had it confirmed. You know that name, she said. Richard Betrayal was my supervisor at the DOJ during the task force. He was still crouching in front of the filing cabinet. He closed the drawer slowly. He was the one I handed all the evidence to when I left. The silence that followed that statement had weight. Isabella felt it settle on her shoulders. He killed it, she said. He had the investigation dissolved. He had everything I'd built for 2 years, and he buried it. And then Cole stood up. His expression had gone to a place she couldn't fully read, controlled, but barely. And then he kept using the same network, because there was nobody left who knew enough to stop it. Cole. I'm fine. He wasn't fine. He picked up the accordion folders. Let's go. They were back at the car in under 4 minutes. Cole put the folders in the trunk under a moving blanket and drove them back toward the city, while Isabella sat in the passenger seat and kept checking the mirrors, even though she didn't know exactly what she was looking for. She just knew she needed to do something with her hands and her attention, and watching the road was something. The recording, she said. That's admissible, right? As evidence? It establishes Fenn's testimony and intent. It corroborates the documents. With a competent attorney, he stopped. We need someone outside the federal system, and someone who isn't connected to any firm that does federal work, because those connections are exactly the exposure point. He thought for a moment. I know someone. She's a criminal defense attorney in Milwaukee, retired from the bar 3 years ago, but she knows people who are still active and she owes me a conversation. Owes you? Her brother was the witness who made it, the one who got relocated. I helped with that before I left. He said it without self-congratulation, just the way things were. She'll take the call. They drove for a few minutes in silence. Then Cole's phone rang through the car speaker. Unknown number. He looked at it once, then answered. Mercer. Silence on the line. Then, you still drive that ugly Civic? Cole's hand tightened on the wheel, then eased. Who is this? But his body knew before his mind confirmed it. There was a specific kind of recognition that lives in the muscles. Dylan. A beat. Then a male voice, mid-40s, slightly rough. I heard you were back in the game. Word travels. Another beat. I also heard you've got a passenger. Cole said nothing. I'm not calling to cause problems, Dylan said. I'm calling because I have something you need and I'm running out of time to give it to anyone who can actually use it. Where are you? Warehouse District, South Side. I can give you an address. He paused. Come alone. Not happening. Mercer. She comes with me or we don't come. Give me the address. A long pause on the line. Fine. But come in through the east loading dock. Don't use the front. The call ended. Isabella looked at Cole. Dylan Cross, Cole said. He was the second witness, the one I said didn't make it. He checked the mirror. I meant he didn't get relocated. He didn't die. He just disappeared back into whatever he came from. He was a witness to the original task force investigation. He was a mid-level compliance officer inside one of the shell companies. He came to us voluntarily. He had documents, testimony, the whole thing. Cole's jaw moved. 3 weeks before we were going to bring him in formally, he pulled out, said they'd threatened his family, said he couldn't do it, and then he was gone. He exhaled slowly. That was 2017. And now he's calling you. 9 years later, he made the turn south. Yeah. The warehouse on the south side had seen better industrial decades. The loading dock on the east side was accessible through a chain-link gate that was standing slightly open. Not broken open, just unlocked, which meant someone was expecting them. Cole pulled the Civic around back and parked where it wouldn't be visible from the main street. I need you to stay close, he said. Not behind me. Beside me. If something's wrong in there, don't run back toward the car. Go left along the wall. There's a gap in the fence 40 feet down. You already checked the fence. On the drive in. She looked at him. When? I was watching and I didn't see you. It's a fast check. You learn to do it without looking like you're doing it. He opened his door. Stay beside me. Dylan Cross turned out to be a man who looked like he'd been carrying a heavy thing for a long time. He was seated on an overturned milk crate in the middle of the warehouse floor, beneath one of the few skylights that still had intact glass, and he looked up when they came through the loading dock door with the expression of someone who had already decided to be relieved before there was any reason to be. He was heavier than he'd been in 2017. Gray at the temples, a scar along the left side of his jaw that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a work jacket and jeans, and his hands were clasped in front of him the way people clasp their hands when they're actively working to keep them still. You look older, Dylan said to Cole. You look like you haven't slept in a year, Cole said. It wasn't unkind, just accurate. Dylan's eyes went to Isabella. Ms. Sterling. He said it the way people say the name of someone they've been hearing about from a distance. I'm sorry for what's happening to you. Some of it I could have prevented. I didn't. He didn't dress it up. How do you know me? She said. I've been adjacent to this network for 9 years. I'm not inside it. I never went back in, not voluntarily, but when you live in the margins of something, you know what's happening in its center. He looked back at Cole. They're going to move against her hard in the next 24 hours. The evidence retrieval, whatever you've already done, they know or suspect it. There's an operation being coordinated through Crestfall to recover those documents before she can use them. How do you know what we've already done? Cole said. Because I've had eyes on 3 different Crestfall locations for 6 months. I've been building my own record. He reached into the inside of his jacket and came out with a small hard drive. The kind that's maybe the size of a pack of cards, matte black, nothing identifying about it. He held it out toward Cole. Audio recordings. 41 hours of intercepted internal communications between Crestfall executives and 2 individuals I've confirmed as federal officials. Dates, names, specific authorization of actions. He paused. Including the authorization of the traffic accident that killed Marcus Fenn. Cole took the drive. He didn't look away from Dylan while he did it. Why now? Cole said. 9 years, Dylan. Why now? Dylan looked down at his hands. The clasped hands thing. He unclenched them and put them flat on his thighs instead. Because my daughter started college this year, and she wants to study law. She told me last month she wants to prosecute corporate crime. He said it with the look of a man who understands irony in a personal and unfunny way. I couldn't look at her and keep being the thing I've been. Somebody who knew and kept quiet because it was easier than the alternative. The warehouse was quiet for a moment. A bird somewhere in the rafters shifted. You know what giving me this means? Cole said. It wasn't a question. I know what it means for them, and I know what it means for me. Dylan looked at Isabella. Use it, all of it. Whatever it costs me, use it. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. This man she'd never met, who had spent 9 years living alongside his own failure. She thought of Marcus Fenn on that recording. I'm sorry I couldn't finish it properly. She thought of Carla Ibsen's 7-year-old daughter. She didn't say anything that would make this moment smaller than it was. Cole pocketed the drive. We need to go. Are you somewhere safe? Safe enough? Dylan stood up. There's one more thing. He said it with the careful tone of someone who has been deciding whether to say a thing and has finally decided. The record showing you received payments from the network, the documents they released last night. Cole's expression shifted. What about them? I know where they were manufactured. The digital signatures trace back to a federal archive system, specifically a subset of DOJ records that were accessed using credentials belonging to your old task force clearance. He looked at Cole directly. They used your own clearance level to build the forgery. Your clearance was never formally revoked when you left. It was just placed inactive. Someone reactivated it internally without authorization, accessed the archive, and built documents that look like they originated inside your own case files. The implication of that landed in the warehouse like something physical. They've been planning this version of it for years, Cole said. Not surprise in his voice, something colder. I was always part of the contingency. If anyone came close, frame the investigator. Yes. Isabella had been standing beside Cole through this, and she said nothing, but something changed in her face. It was the particular expression of someone who has just realized they doubted the wrong person. She didn't look at Cole yet. She looked at Dylan as if confirming the information from the source one more time. The credentials, she said. Can that access be documented? A log? Federal systems keep access logs with timestamp and IP origin, Dylan said. The question is whether those logs are still intact or whether they've been scrubbed. He looked at Cole. Your friend at the DOJ, Betrayal, has the access level to scrub them. But those kinds of deletions leave traces of their own in the system architecture. It's not clean even when they try. Cole nodded slowly. We need a forensic systems specialist, someone who can pull metadata from federal archives without being inside the system officially. I know someone, Isabella said. Cole looked at her. His name is Tomas Reyes. He consulted for Sterling Horizon's IT division 2 years ago. He's independent, he's good, and he's got clearances from prior federal contract work that he never had reason to use. She pulled out the prepaid phone Cole had given her that morning and then stopped. Is this line safe? Change the SIM before I gave it to you. Make it fast. She made the call. It took 30 seconds to explain enough to Tomas Reyes that he said yes, he'd help, he'd need remote access to a specific system node in 8 hours. Cole gave him a contact protocol. The call ended. Dylan was watching them work with the expression of someone who has spent years watching things fall apart and is not yet sure how to look at things going together. Go somewhere you don't usually go, Cole told him. Don't contact anyone from your old life. Give me 48 hours. And if it goes wrong? Then it goes wrong and you still gave us the best chance we had. Cole held out his hand. Dylan Cross looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. They were almost back to the loading dock when it happened. The east wall of the warehouse had 4 high windows running along it, 3 of them painted over, 1 of them clear. Cole caught the movement through the clear one as they passed it. A reflection in the glass of the building across the alley, the brief lateral movement of 2 figures taking positions. He grabbed Isabella's arm and pulled her sideways behind a structural column without explaining. She went without resisting. She was learning his signals. How many? She said, barely above a whisper. At least 2 outside. East side. He looked back. Dylan was still visible near his milk crate. Cole caught his eye and made a flat palm gesture. Stay down. Dylan dropped without hesitation. The loading dock door they'd come in through was to the east. The west side of the building had a delivery entrance that was chained but not padlocked. Cole had noted it on the way in. There was a gap of about 60 feet of open floor between their position and that door. He looked at Isabella. Can you move fast? Yes. Then we go when I say. Don't stop for anything. West door, straight across. Stay low. I know, you told me the fence gap. Forget the fence. We're taking the car. They're positioned east, which means the car is still clean. He looked at the clear window once more. The reflected figures hadn't moved. They were waiting for Cole and Isabella to come out the loading dock door. Ready? She nodded. Go. They crossed 60 feet of warehouse floor in the time it takes to breathe 3 times. Cole hit the west delivery door with his shoulder. The chain rattled, but the door swung on its hinges because chains only work if the door frame is solid, and this one had been settling for 20 years. They came out into an alley that ran parallel to the building, turned north, cut through a gap between 2 structures. The Civic was where they'd left it. Cole had them moving inside 15 seconds. 3 blocks away, no sign of pursuit, he let himself exhale. Isabella sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap. She was breathing hard but controlled. She turned and looked at him. The forgery, she said. The record showing you took money from them. Yeah. I doubted you. When you told me about it this morning, before we went to the unit, I was listening to you explain it, and I was also running a calculation in my head about whether it was possible you were actually compromised. She said it without softening it. I want you to know that. Cole kept his eyes on the road. I know, he said. I could see it. Does it bother you? A pause. Would it bother you if someone doubted whether you'd stolen $600 million from your own company? She was quiet for a second. Yes, it would. Then yeah, Cole said. It bothered me. He glanced over at her. But you told me anyway just now, so we're past it. She nodded, looked out the windshield. Cole. She said it the same way she'd said it last night, at the top of the stairs. like his name was a punctuation mark. I need you to know, I believe you. Not because I have no other option, because the evidence says you're clean, and because the way you've handled everything since last night is not the behavior of someone who is working against me. She paused. I need you to know I'm saying it, not just thinking it. He drove for a moment without answering. Thank you, he said. Just that. The drive back north felt longer than it was. The city was waking up around them, that slow Chicago morning process of traffic thickening and delivery trucks appearing and people with coffee cups walking to train stations. The normal texture of the world, proceeding as it always did, with no awareness that somewhere inside its ordinary structures something large and rotten was fighting very hard to stay hidden. Cole thought about Betrayal, thought about handing over 5 years of accumulated work to a man in a gray suit in a government office in 2017, shaking hands, walking out into a parking garage and sitting in his truck for 10 minutes before driving back to Chicago. He'd told himself he was doing the right thing, choosing his daughter over a case, choosing presence over mission. And he had been doing the right thing. That part was true. But he'd also handed Betrayal a loaded weapon and never checked what he did with it. That was the part that sat with him. Not the grief about his wife, not the weight of the witness who hadn't made it. The part about knowing that the investigation existed, believing it was in safe hands, and being wrong about that for 9 years while the damage compounded. He thought about what Dylan had said. My daughter wants to prosecute corporate crime. I thought about his own daughter upstairs this morning, handing him clothes for a woman she'd never met without asking too many questions. Because she'd spent 19 years learning to read the version of her father that appeared during situations like this, and she understood, on some animal level, that this was one of those times. Both of them building towards something, children who'd watched their parents carry the weight of difficult things and had decided to carry different versions of it themselves. He wasn't sure that was good, but he couldn't decide right now whether it was bad. The prepaid phone buzzed on the dash. A text from Tomas Reyes. In the system, you were right about the access logs. Give me 6 more hours. Cole read it without picking up the phone. Good news wore the same face as bad news, in the sense that both of them meant the situation was moving. Standing still was the only truly dangerous position. He looked at Isabella. She'd fallen asleep in the passenger seat. Not deeply, just the shallow, half-conscious drift of someone whose body has finally insisted on taking 15 minutes, regardless of circumstances. Her head was leaning slightly toward the window. The borrowed clothes were wrinkled. There was still a faint mark on her left cheekbone where she'd hit something in the stairwell during the run last night. She didn't look like the face that was currently on every news platform in the country. She looked like a person who was tired and had done nothing wrong and was paying an enormous price for knowing too much. Cole drove north and kept his eyes on the mirrors, and the city moved around them, and somewhere in a federal building on the other side of the country, a man named Richard Betrayal was almost certainly sitting behind a clean desk drinking coffee and watching the morning news and feeling secure in the belief that the problem was handled. He was wrong about that. He'd been wrong about Cole Mercer before, and the outcome hadn't been to his benefit either time. Tomas Reyes called back at 2:17 in the afternoon. Cole had spent the intervening hours doing 3 things: reviewing Dylan's audio recordings on a laptop he'd borrowed from his daughter, cross-referencing dates in the recordings against the timeline. Isabella was building from Fenn's annotated documents and drinking more coffee than was probably good for him. Isabella had been at the folding table for 4 straight hours without stopping, working through the accordion folders with the focused intensity of someone who is simultaneously reliving a nightmare and building the case that might end it. She'd found 17 names. Fenn had been right about the count. She'd also found something Fenn hadn't flagged, or hadn't had time to flag, a series of internal board communications between Warren Aldrich and 2 other directors that predated the fraud by 18 months, and documented, in the careful indirect language of people who understood plausible deniability, the deliberate structuring of the procurement relationships that would become the money channels. It wasn't a smoking gun in itself, but it was the architectural blueprint. It showed the intention before the action, which was the difference between a mistake and a conspiracy. When Reyes called, Cole put him on speaker. The access logs are intact, Reyes said. He had a fast, efficient way of talking that skipped everything decorative. Whoever went into the Federal Archive system to build the forgery on Mercer used credentials assigned to Task Force Clearance Level 7 Alpha,
inactive since January 2018. The access event was logged at 4:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, 6 weeks ago. IP origin traces to a VPN exit node in Virginia, but the authentication request was routed through a DOJ internal relay, which means whoever did this was inside the DOJ system, not just pretending to be. Can you document that? Cole said. Already have. I've got a time-stamped export of the log entry, the authentication chain, and the relay routing. It's clean. It'll hold. A brief pause. There's one more thing. The same clearance credentials were used a second time, 4 days after the first access. That second access pulled personnel files, specifically files associated with your task force members, including 2 witnesses. Another pause. One of those witnesses is listed as relocated. The other is listed as deceased. Cole looked at Isabella across the table. She was watching the phone. He's not deceased, Cole said. I know, I pulled the file. The deceased designation was entered manually, not through any official process. No death certificate, no coroner reference, no case closure documentation. Someone just changed a field in a federal database. Reyes's voice carried the flat disapproval of someone who cares about data integrity at a cellular level. Which means Dylan Cross has technically been dead on paper for 8 years. Which means if he surfaces now, Cole started.
He surfaces as a ghost, someone who doesn't legally exist testifying against people who do. It's complicated. Reyes cleared his throat. But the falsification of that record is itself a federal crime. Whoever changed that entry left a user ID in the system's own audit trail that they apparently didn't think to scrub. A beat. The user ID resolves to Richard Betrayal. The room was very quiet. Isabella sat back slowly in her chair. Cole reached over and ended the call after thanking Reyes and confirming the secure transfer protocol for the documents. Then he sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular for about 10 seconds. It's enough, Isabella said. It's almost enough. Cole, we have Fenn's documents, his recording, his annotated analysis of 17 individuals. We have Dylan's 41 hours of intercepted communications. We have Reyes's forensic log of the forged evidence against you. We have Pryle's user ID on the falsified witness file. She ticked these off with the same calm she'd used to tally her losses the first night. Just the facts, organized. What is it not enough for? It's enough for charges. It's not enough for a conviction without a clean federal prosecutor, and we don't know who's clean. He pushed back from the table. And none of it stops the board meeting. She'd been aware of the board meeting the way you're aware of an approaching storm. Not constant panic, just a low-level background pressure. The emergency session. Aldrich would call it within the next 24 hours if he hadn't already. Under Sterling Horizon's corporate charter, a vote of no confidence with evidence of criminal conduct, even fraudulent forged evidence, was sufficient to trigger an interim CEO appointment pending investigation. By the time the forgery could be proven in court, the board could have her replaced, the company restructured, and the evidence they'd worked against impossible to deploy effectively because the legal standing from which she could act would be gone. When does he call the meeting? Cole asked. He needs 48 hours notice to board members, but he can invoke the emergency provision with 24 hours if he cites imminent material risk to the company. She looked at her phone, the prepaid one, nothing incoming. He'll cite the federal investigation as imminent material risk. He's probably already sent the notices. Then we have less than 24 hours. Yes. Cole stood up and walked to the window. The afternoon had turned gray, cloud cover moving in off the lake, the kind of Chicago overcast that settles in like it plans to stay. He stood with his back to her for a moment, thinking. The problem with the board meeting wasn't just timing, it was location. Sterling Horizon's headquarters occupied the upper floors of a 40-story building in the Loop. Aldrich would run the meeting from the executive boardroom on the 38th floor. The building had gone into what the company's security team was calling an elevated security protocol in the last 12 hours. Cole had confirmed this through a contact who monitored corporate security communications. That meant additional access controls on the executive elevators, security personnel at every lobby entrance with biometric check-in for building access, and Aldrich's own private security, which meant Crestfall, stationed on the executive floors. Isabella's biometric profile was still in the building's access system. That was both useful and dangerous. Useful because it meant her credentials could theoretically get her through a door. Dangerous because the moment those credentials were used, everyone in the building with a security feed would know exactly where she was. The maintenance tunnels, Cole said. She looked up. What? The building has a maintenance infrastructure, HVAC, electrical, plumbing access corridors. Old buildings like that one, loop construction from the early 90s. They run service tunnels under the parking structure that connect to the building's mechanical levels. He turned around. I did a security assessment on that building 4 years ago. Independent contractor, brought in by a previous board member who had concerns about the existing security setup. He looked at her. I know the tunnel layout. Isabella was quiet for a moment. You did a security assessment on my headquarters building. Before you were CEO, before I knew it was your building. He paused. Before I knew you existed. Right. She absorbed this. Where do the tunnels come out? Sub-basement, mechanical level. From there, the service elevator, not the executive elevator, the building operations elevator that runs alongside the east stairwell, goes all the way to 38. It requires a facilities access card, not biometric. Can we get a facilities card? I still have one. He said it with the mild expression of a man who has not specifically thought about why he kept it. I never returned it after the assessment. Standard practice is to deactivate contract cards after the engagement ends, but it requires someone in facilities to process the deactivation. They don't always do it. Have you checked if it's still active? No, we'll know when we try it. Isabella looked at him for a moment. That's a significant unknown variable. Everything right now is an unknown variable. The question is whether we have better options. He held her gaze. Do we? She thought about it honestly. No. Then we prepare for the unknowns. We can anticipate and move on, the ones we can't. The preparation took 3 hours. Cole made 4 calls from the prepaid phone. One to the attorney in Milwaukee. Reyes would send the complete documentation package to her encrypted drop within the hour, and she confirmed she had a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois, who operated outside the DOJ chain of command and had no documented connections to any of the Harrow Network's identified individuals. One call to Dylan, short and specific. Be ready to testify. Be ready to make the recordings available to federal investigators. Be prepared for his legal existence to be a complication that would need to be addressed quickly. Dylan said he understood, and Cole believed him because there was a particular quality to Dylan Cross's voice now that hadn't been there in 2017. It was the voice of someone who had already paid most of the price and was past caring about the remainder. The third call was to his daughter. He told her he loved her, that he'd explain everything when it was over, and that she should stay at her friend's apartment tonight and not come home. She argued for approximately 90 seconds before reading something in his silence that made her stop. She said, okay. She said, be careful. She said it the way she always said it, which was with the understanding that she knew exactly what careful meant in her father's vocabulary, and that it was a different word than it was for most people. The fourth call he made from a different room. Isabella didn't ask who it was. He came back and said the U.S. Attorney's contact had been briefed and was prepared to move the moment documentation was received and authenticated. The arrest protocols were being prepared under a sealed federal complaint to prevent any internal leak before the operation was complete. The authentication will take time, Isabella said, even with everything we have. It'll take less time if she walks into that boardroom and puts it on the table herself. Cole looked at her. That's what we're building toward. You present the evidence directly to the board before Aldrich can call the vote. You take the room. You make them look at the actual documentation instead of the fabricated version they've been fed. He paused. And Dylan testifies. Live in that room if we can manage it, or via recorded statement played in front of witnesses. Aldrich will try to shut it down the moment he sees me. Yes. He controls the room. He's the chairman. He controls the room until someone else has the floor. You're still the CEO of that company, Isabella. Until that vote happens, you have standing. He held eye contact. You know how to take a room. I've watched you operate for 3 days under conditions that would have broken most people. In your own boardroom, with the actual truth in your hands. He stopped. Didn't finish it with something dramatic. Just do what you do. She looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like the specific feeling of being accurately seen by someone who isn't trying to manage you. Let's go over the tunnel layout, she said. They went in at 11:40 that night. Cole had borrowed a second vehicle, this one from a contact in the neighborhood, a white panel van that wouldn't draw a second look outside a commercial building during late night hours. He'd also sourced two sets of building maintenance coveralls, the kind with a contractor logo on the chest that nobody ever looks at closely, and hard hats, and a toolbox that contained tools in addition to the things that weren't tools. The tunnel access point was 2 blocks from Sterling Horizon's main tower, through a utility connection that ran under the adjacent parking structure. Cole had memorized the route from the assessment drawings years ago. He confirmed the memory against a rough sketch he'd made from recall that afternoon, checking it against Isabella's recollection of the building's sub-basement layout, which she knew from a facilities walkthrough she'd done when she first became CEO. They combined memories and built a map on a sheet of paper that Cole folded and put in his breast pocket, and which would hopefully become irrelevant once they were inside. The service elevator, Isabella said as they walked the tunnel. What floor do we go to? 35. We walked the last 3 flights. He was leading, flashlight in hand, moving at a pace that was deliberately unhurried. Urgency in a maintenance corridor draws attention from anyone who passes through. Boredom is invisible. The elevator opens into a service corridor on 35. From there, the stairwell door is 30 feet east. Why not take the elevator to 38 directly? Elevator logs. The service elevator to 38 will flag in the security system because of the elevated protocol. 35 is below the flagged range. He glanced back at her. 3 flights of stairs. I'm aware of how stairs work. You're in coveralls and boots, and you haven't slept more than 4 hours in 2 days. I'm fine. You said that about your feet on the first night, too. She was quiet for a moment. I was also fine about my feet. He almost smiled. Didn't quite. The facilities card worked. He didn't let the relief show on his face, but his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch when the service elevator panel accepted the swipe and the doors opened. Isabella noticed. She noticed most things, but she didn't say anything. 35 was quiet. The service corridor smelled like cleaning solution and warm electrical infrastructure. 2 ceiling lights ran the length of it, fluorescent, one of them buzzing with the specific frequency of a ballast that needed replacing. They moved to the stairwell door. Cole checked the gap at the bottom. No shadows moving on the other side. And they went up. 3 flights of stairs. Isabella made it without complaint. At the top, Cole stopped her with a hand on her arm before she reached for the door. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. She waited. There are going to be people in that room who have known you for years, who you've worked alongside. Some of them may have known about this and done nothing. Some of them may be genuinely shocked. He looked at her directly. Either way, the moment you walk in, you're going to feel all of it. The anger, the betrayal, whatever it is. And you're going to want to lead with that. I know. Don't. I know, Cole. Lead with the documents. Lead with the evidence. The emotion is real and it belongs to you, but the evidence is what wins. She looked at him. I've been running a corporation for 6 years. I've sat across the table from people trying to dismantle me for 6 years. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was just certain. I know how to be in a room. He nodded. Okay. But thank you for saying it. He pushed the door open. The 38th floor had a different quality from the service levels. The carpet was thick under their boots, which felt strange after concrete. The corridor was lit with the specific warmth of expensive overhead fixtures, and the walls had the kind of neutral corporate art that is chosen to be inoffensive to the maximum number of people and succeeds completely at that ambition. 2 security personnel were stationed at the far end, outside the boardroom doors. Crestfall uniforms. Cole clocked them in the first second, both armed, neither one expecting a threat from the stairwell end of the corridor. He put his hand on Isabella's arm again. Follow my lead. Don't slow down. They walked toward the boardroom like they belonged there, because the most effective way to walk anywhere you're not supposed to be is to walk like you've done it 1,000 times before. Cole kept his hard hat on and his toolbox in his right hand and his pace even. Isabella kept a step and a half behind him and to his left. They were 20 feet from the guards when Cole said, loudly enough to be conversational, "Elevator shaft sensor on this floor keeps tripping the panel. Facilities needs us to take a look before the morning." The guard on the left held up a hand. "Nobody authorized for this floor tonight. You need to..." He didn't finish because at that moment the boardroom doors opened. Warren Aldrich stepped out. 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had been polished by decades of money into something that looked trustworthy from a distance. He had his phone in his hand and the expression of someone who'd been called out of a conversation they were controlling. He saw Cole first, processing. Then he saw Isabella. His face did something interesting. The practiced control of it slipped for about 3/4 of a second, just long enough to reveal the thing underneath, which was not surprise but recognition. Not she's here, but she made it here, which was a different thing and meant something about how much he'd expected her not to. Isabella, he said. He recovered fast. This is highly irregular. Warren. She walked past the guard who'd been starting to step toward her, and she walked past Cole, and she pushed both boardroom doors open herself. Her voice was the kind of steady that takes years to build. I believe this is still my company, so I'll be taking my seat now. Cole followed her in. The boardroom had 14 people in it, 11 board members, a corporate attorney, a secretary taking minutes, and a man Cole didn't recognize who turned out to be Aldrich's personal legal counsel. They all looked up at the intrusion with varying combinations of shock, discomfort, and in 2 cases, 2 board members on the far end of the table, something that looked like relief. Isabella set the accordion folders on the table. She set Reyes's printed forensic documentation beside them. She removed the digital recorder from her jacket pocket and set it in the center of the table. I apologize for the informality of my entrance, she said, which was the only thing she said that acknowledged how she'd arrived. I'd like 20 minutes to present evidence to this board before any vote is taken. Under Section 14 of our corporate charter, any board member may request a 20-minute presentation floor. I am requesting that as an active board member and as the current CEO of this company. She looked around the table. Does anyone object to 20 minutes? Aldrich was standing at the head of the table. This is completely out of, I'm asking the board, Warren, not you specifically. She looked at the board members. 20 minutes. Does anyone object? A pause. The 2 board members at the far end, both women, both of whom had been with the company longer than Aldrich, looked at each other. The one on the left, a woman named Patricia Sue, who had been the CFO of 2 different Fortune 500 companies before joining Sterling's board, said, No objection. 20 minutes, Isabella. Aldrich sat down. He didn't have a choice. The room was watching him, and he knew how it looked to refuse 20 minutes. Isabella talked for 22 minutes. Cole stood near the door and watched it happen. She didn't perform. She didn't plead. She walked the room through Marcus Fenn's documentation methodically, naming the 17 individuals, tracing the money channels with specifics and dates and account identifiers. She played 60 seconds of Dylan's audio recording, the section where Aldrich's voice was clearly audible, authorizing a payment to a named federal official in exchange for the suppression of a regulatory inquiry. And she let that sit in the room without comment for a moment before continuing. She presented Reyes's forensic log. She explained in plain language how her own task force clearance credentials had been reactivated inside the DOJ system to manufacture the evidence against Cole. She named Richard Betrayal. She produced the authentication trail. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. At one point, toward the end, her hand shook very slightly when she picked up one of Fenn's documents. Marcus Fenn, who had sent her a careful letter 4 days after dying on an overpass at 3 a.m, and she set it down again and steadied herself and continued. Aldrich interrupted twice. Both times Patricia Sue said, "Let her finish," in the tone of someone who has been in enough rooms to know when a room has already decided. When Isabella finished, she said, "I'm asking this board to suspend the emergency session vote pending an independent legal review of this evidence. I'm also informing you that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District has already received authenticated copies of everything I've just shown you and is acting on it as of this morning." The room was very quiet. Aldrich pushed back from the table. "This is fabricated. Every bit of it is fabricated by a woman who is the subject of a federal—" The boardroom doors opened again. Dylan Cross walked in. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had carried something heavy for a long time and had finally put it down, not gracefully, but definitively. He had the recording device in his hands and a USB drive and the expression of someone who has stopped calculating the personal cost of things. He walked to the center of the table. He set both items down. "My name is Dylan Cross," he said. In 2017, I was a compliance officer for Meridian Risk Partners, which is one of the shell entities documented in those folders. I was a confidential witness in a federal investigation into procurement fraud. My cooperation was terminated under threat, and a federal official subsequently falsified my legal status in government records. He looked at Aldrich. The voice on that recording is yours. The authorization you're giving is for the payment of $300,000 to Richard Betrayal at the DOJ, in exchange for the termination of an active federal investigation. He looked around the room. I'll testify to all of it, under oath, in any court that will hear it. Warren Aldrich stood up. 3 things happened in the next 90 seconds. The first was that Patricia Sue moved a formal suspension of the emergency vote, which was seconded immediately by 2 other board members and carried by a show of hands before Aldrich could speak. The second was that Cole's phone buzzed. A text from the Milwaukee attorney. Federal agents at DOJ building now. Betrayal in custody. Warrants executing on Crestfall and Aldrich simultaneously. The third was that the boardroom's main doors opened for the 3rd time that night, and 4 federal agents came in, badges out, moving with the specific efficiency of people who have been briefed and authorized and are simply completing the last step of a long process. Warren Aldrich looked at the agents. He looked at Isabella. Something went out of his face. Not guilt, not remorse, just the particular deflation of someone whose plan has comprehensively failed in a room full of witnesses. Warren Aldrich, the lead agent said, you're under arrest for federal procurement fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and conspiracy to commit murder in the 1st degree. Cole watched them put the cuffs on. He watched Aldrich's personal attorney step back reflexively, already calculating the distance between himself and his client. He watched the board members, some of them shocked, genuinely, some of them relieved in a way that suggested they'd suspected something for a long time and not known what to do with that knowledge. He watched Isabella. She didn't watch Aldrich being let out. She was looking at the accordion folders on the table, at Marcus Fenn's handwriting on the annotated documents, the careful, deliberate notation of a man who'd been thorough even when he was afraid. She reached out and put 2 fingers on the top folder, not picking it up, just touching it, like you touch something that belongs to someone who isn't there anymore. Cole walked over to her. You okay? He said quietly. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't going to cry in this room, in front of these people. But there was something in her face that was neither victory nor relief, because she was the kind of person who understood that cleaning up a disaster, even completely, doesn't make the disaster not have happened. Ask me again in a few hours, she said. Fair enough. Patricia Sue came around the table and extended her hand to Isabella. We have a lot of work to do, she said. Starting tonight, if you're up for it. Isabella shook her hand. Give me 10 minutes, she said. Then yes. She turned to Cole. He was already picking up his hard hat from where he'd set it against the wall. The toolbox was by the door. He looked, in his contractor coveralls, completely out of place in a boardroom, which was accurate. He was completely out of place here. And also, in the way of things that have just worked out against reasonable odds, exactly where he was supposed to be. 10 minutes, she said to him. Don't go anywhere. He set the hard hat back down. I'll be right here, he said. And the night that had started with everything going wrong continued its long, grinding turn toward something different. Not clean, not resolved of all its damage, but moving in a direction that finally made sense, with the kind of people who'd paid the real price still standing at the end of it. The 10 minutes she asked for turned into 3 hours. Cole sat in a chair outside the boardroom and waited, and nobody asked him to leave, which he interpreted as the building's implicit acknowledgement that the night had been unusual enough that normal protocols could take a breath. He took off the hard hat for good and set the toolbox against the wall and sat with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, doing the thing he'd learned to do after high-pressure operations. The slow, deliberate process of letting the body understand that the acute phase was over, that the next thing coming wasn't another threat, that it was allowed to stop running the calculations. It took a while. It always took a while. Through the boardroom doors he could hear voices, the measured, formal cadence of Patricia Sue, the careful responses of board members processing an evening that had dismantled everything they thought they knew about their own institution. Occasionally Isabella's clear, direct, answering questions without deflection. At one point he heard her say, I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm asking for your commitment to doing this differently. And then a silence, and then the sound of people agreeing. A federal agent came by at some point and asked Cole to give a preliminary statement, which he did, standing in the corridor, keeping it factual and specific and short. The agent wrote things down and said they'd need a formal interview in the next 48 hours. Cole said he understood. The agent looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who is trying to figure out exactly what category this person belongs to, then gave up and moved on. At 2 in the morning, the boardroom doors opened and Isabella came out. She looked exhausted in the way that only becomes visible once the adrenaline has fully evacuated, the particular flatness around the eyes, the slight slackness of someone who has been holding every muscle at attention for too many consecutive hours and has finally stopped. But she also looked like herself, which was the thing Cole noticed most. Not the CEO on the news crawl that had been running her photo above words like fugitive and federal inquiry. Not the woman in the torn green gown sprinting across a parking garage. Just the actual person. Tired, honest, intact. Done? He said. Not even close. She sat down in the chair beside him. Not across from him. Beside him, which was a different thing. But done for tonight. She leaned her head back against the wall. The board is suspending all executive decisions pending independent review. Patricia H. Sue is taking interim chair. They're bringing in an outside auditing firm starting Monday. That's the right call. Yes. She closed her eyes for a moment. I recommended it, which is either wisdom or the strangest form of self-preservation I've ever practiced. Probably both. Probably. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. I also told them I'd be making a public statement tomorrow, that I'm voluntarily stepping aside during the review period. Cole looked at her. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. She said it without any sharpness, just the certainty of someone who had made a decision through the right process and was at peace with it. When Marcus first flagged the discrepancy in January, he sent a note to my office. He marked it urgent. I was in the middle of Q1 earnings, and I had my assistant push it to the following week's schedule. She paused. He died before that week came. She breathed in slowly. I didn't know what he'd found. I didn't know what the urgency meant. But I also didn't stop to find out. I just moved it down the list. Cole didn't say it wasn't her fault. He'd learned at some point in his life that telling people something isn't their fault when they're in the middle of honestly assessing their part in something is a way of making the speaker feel better, not the listener. It interrupts the reckoning. And the reckoning, when someone is doing it cleanly and without self-destruction, is worth something. You'll carry that, he said. Yes. She looked at him. And I should, not as punishment, just as information about what kind of leader I want to be going forward. He nodded. You don't seem surprised, she said. I'm not. You're the kind of person who does the accounting correctly even when the numbers aren't in your favor. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is that a compliment? It's an observation, but yes. She almost smiled, made it further toward an actual smile than she usually did. Come on, she said. I think we both need to be somewhere that isn't this building. They rode down in the regular elevator. Not the service one, not the stairs. The lobby was still active with a residual federal presence, agents moving through, a crime scene coordinator doing something with a laptop near the security desk. The night doorman watched Cole and Isabella walk out with the expression of a man who had seen enough unusual things in the last 3 hours to have simply stopped categorizing. Outside, the city was that particular version of itself that only exists between 2 and 4 in the morning, not empty, never fully empty, but stripped of its daytime noise down to something more honest. A delivery truck 2 blocks north, a cab at a light. The ambient glow of 10,000 office windows from buildings that run their lights all night because someone decided it looked better than darkness. Isabella stood on the sidewalk and took a breath of cold air that seemed to go all the way down to something she'd been holding closed for months. My car is at the event venue, she said, which is where this started. Approximately 40 hours ago, Cole said. She turned and looked at him. Is that all it's been? Give or take. She shook her head slightly. Not disbelief. More like the adjustment a person makes when time has done something strange to their interior sense of it. 40 hours. She'd been CEO, fugitive, collaborator, witness, and CEO again inside 40 hours, with stops for a storage unit in Evanston, a warehouse on the south side, and 3 flights of stairs in contractor coveralls. "I'll get a cab," she said. "I'll drive you." "You don't have to, Isabella." He said her name the way she'd learned to say his, not with formality, not with the careful professional distance that they'd started with, but as a plain address between people who had seen each other in circumstances that burned off everything extraneous. "I'll drive you. It's 3 in the morning." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "Okay." The drive to the venue was quiet. Cole took the Civic because the van was still parked by the building and he'd deal with it tomorrow. The streets were clear. Chicago at 3 a.m. runs at a different frequency, slower and more honest, the way people get when they think no one's watching. They didn't talk much in the car. They'd said most of what needed saying over the past 2 days, and they both seemed to understand that the silence wasn't absence of something, it was just its own thing. 2 people who were tired in the same direction. He pulled up outside the venue. Her car, a dark sedan with a company plate, was still in the adjacent lot, undisturbed. She got out. He got out too, because leaving someone in an empty parking lot at 3 in the morning after the 40 hours they'd just had didn't sit right with him, regardless of how capable she was. She unlocked her car and then stood beside it and looked at him across the roof. "What happens now?" she said. "For you." He thought about it honestly. "I go home. Sleep. Replace those fluorescent bulbs in the towing garage that have been flickering for 2 weeks. And after that? After that, I have 4 vehicles waiting on work and a transmission I was in the middle of when you ran into me." She tilted her head slightly. "That's really what you're going to do." "It's what I do." "The government is going to want you back," she said. "After this, Prail's arrest, the scope of it. They're going to look at what you built 9 years ago and realize they need someone who understands the architecture of it. Probably. And? And I'll consult, independently. I'll answer questions and give them what they need, and then I'll go back to the shop." He looked at her steadily. "I left once for a case and missed 2 years of my daughter's life. She was 17. She turned 19 while I was rebuilding a transmission on a Tuesday." He paused. "I'm not saying that to make it sound noble. I'm saying it because that's the actual math of the decision. I know what I'm choosing." Isabella looked at him for a long moment. "Your daughter is lucky," she said, not performing sentimentality, just saying what she thought. Most of the time she'd argue with that. Most daughters argue with accurate things about their fathers. She opened her car door. "Cole." "Yeah. Thank you." She said it simply, without decoration, which was the only way it would have meant anything coming from her. Not for saving my life, although that also. For not softening things. For telling me the truth even when it was inconvenient. For staying. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets in an empty parking lot in Chicago at 3-something in the morning and heard the specific weight she put on that last word, because staying was the thing that cost the most and meant the most in her particular experience of people, and he understood that about her now. "You'd have done it without me," he said. "It would have been harder and slower and more dangerous. But you'd have done it." Maybe. She didn't argue it further, which he respected. She got in the car. "Get some sleep." "You too." She drove out of the lot, and he stood there for a moment watching the taillights, and then he got back in the Civic and drove home. The months that followed were not quiet, exactly, but they had a different quality than the preceding chaos. The noise of consequence rather than danger, which is a more manageable kind of noise even when it's very loud. Richard Prail was indicted on 11 federal counts. The indictment was unsealed 3 weeks after his arrest and ran to 47 pages and named 23 additional individuals across 4 federal agencies, 2 state judicial appointments, and the leadership structure of 3 private security firms, including the full executive team of Crestfall Security Consulting. The Crestfall principals entered the federal system with the particular speed of people who understand that cooperation is their only remaining leverage, and their cooperation produced 6 additional arrest warrants within the first month. Warren Aldrich was charged separately: federal procurement fraud, conspiracy, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, covering Marcus Fenn and a second victim whose death had initially been ruled accidental and was now being reinvestigated. He retained a legal team that was expensive and skilled and which spent considerable energy trying to characterize the board recordings as inadmissible. They failed. Dylan Cross testified before a federal grand jury for 2 full days and was described afterward by the lead prosecutor as the most prepared and credible witness she had encountered in 18 years of practice. Dylan's legal existence, the falsified deceased designation in the federal database, was corrected through a formal process that took 6 weeks and involved more paperwork than any living person should have to navigate to prove they are alive. Cole helped him with it, not because he was asked, but because he'd made a promise 9 years ago that he hadn't been able to keep, and keeping it now, even late, mattered to him. Dylan's daughter called Cole once, briefly, to say thank you. Cole told her to take care of her father and hung up because he didn't know what else to say and didn't want to fill the space with things that were less true. The Sterling Horizon independent review took 4 months. It was conducted by an outside firm with no prior relationship to the company and reported directly to the newly restructured board under Patricia Sue's interim chairmanship. The review examined 7 years of operations, identified every point at which the fraud had intersected with legitimate company business, documented the mechanisms by which Harrow-connected individuals had been embedded in the organization's structure, and assessed the leadership response, including Isabella's. The review was not kind to her on every point. It noted that internal audit flags had been raised, smaller flags, not as clear as Fenn's, as far back as 3 years prior to the main discovery. It noted that in 2 of those instances, the flag had been administratively resolved at mid-management level without ever reaching the CEO's desk, which was partly a structural failure and partly a reflection of a leadership culture that had prioritized growth metrics over compliance friction. It did not say Isabella had created that culture intentionally. It did say she had allowed it to persist. Isabella read the full report before it was made public. She sat with it for a day, alone, and then she called Patricia Sue and said, "This goes out unchanged. No legal review to soften the language. No statement of context that buries the hard parts. The whole thing." Patricia Sue said, "I was hoping you'd say that." "I'm also issuing a personal statement alongside it," Isabella said, "not written by the communications team." The personal statement was 4 paragraphs. It acknowledged the structural failures without attributing all blame to people below her. It acknowledged that a CEO who doesn't know something happening in her organization still bears responsibility for the conditions that allowed it not to be known. It announced a compensation fund for employees whose retirement accounts had been impacted by the fraud period, funded from the company's recovery of diverted assets. And it said plainly that she was asking to return as CEO, not because she believed she'd been exonerated of all responsibility, but because she believed she was the right person to rebuild what had been damaged, and she would understand completely if the board and the shareholders disagreed. The board voted to reinstate her. It wasn't unanimous. 3 members voted against. Isabella noted the 3 votes and noted who cast them, and made no move to have them removed from the board, because she understood the difference between disagreement and disloyalty. And because a board that always votes the same direction as the CEO is not a board that is doing its actual job. She started her first day back on a Monday in October, 6 months after a parking garage in the warehouse district at 11:40 at night. She arrived early enough that the lobby was still half lit from the overnight setting, took the regular elevator, walked to her office, and stood at the window for a few minutes looking at the city waking up below her. Then she sat down and started working. She called Cole that evening. He was in the shop, running a diagnostic on a Ford Escape whose owner had described the problem as "makes a weird noise when I turn left," which was the kind of description that could mean 12 different things and required patience. He answered with grease on one hand and held the phone against his shoulder. "First day back," he said. Not a question. "First day back." A beat. It was strange. In a way I wasn't expecting. I thought it would feel like returning to something. It felt more like arriving somewhere new. "Maybe it is." "Maybe." She paused. "How are you?" "Busy. I took on 2 more contracts, independent security consulting, nothing federal. And I hired an assistant for the towing yard, so I'm not answering phones at midnight anymore." "Your daughter convinced you?" "She's been trying for a year. I finally ran out of arguments." He pulled the diagnostic cable free. "She also wants to meet you, by the way. She's been fairly restrained about it, but I can tell." A brief silence. "I'd like that," Isabella said. If you're, I mean, if it's not complicated, Cole said. She asked, I said I'd mention it. I'm mentioning it. Okay. Another beat. Are you free Saturday evening? He thought about the schedule. The escape, a Jeep coming in Thursday, a fleet van on Friday. Saturday evening was open. Yeah. There's a place on Randolph Street I've been meaning to try. Apparently the food is good. I don't know if that's true because it comes from a recommendation by someone on my board who I'm still not entirely sure I trust, but Saturday, Cole said, 7 o'clock. 7, she confirmed. A pause in which he could hear her doing what she sometimes did when she was deciding whether to say something. The almost inaudible quality of a person choosing words. Cole. Yeah. The review report. The part about me. I read it. All of it. All of it. He leaned against the workbench. You made mistakes. You also did the right thing when it was very costly to do the right thing. Both things are true. I keep thinking about Marcus, she said, about the fact that I could have known sooner, that if I'd built a different kind of culture from the beginning, you can't undo it. I know. But you can build the different culture now, which is what you're doing. He said it simply, not to comfort her, but because it was accurate. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing. She was quiet for a moment. You know what I keep coming back to? She said. Not the arrests, not the board vote, not even Marcus. I keep thinking about that first night, in the parking garage. I ran into a complete stranger and threw myself at him because there was literally nobody else. She paused. And he turned out to be the one person in the city who had every reason to care about the same thing I cared about. Coincidence, Cole said. Is that what you think it was? He considered it honestly. He thought about the task force, the evidence he'd handed to a man in a gray suit, the parking garage, the fluorescent lights that had been flickering for 2 weeks in the specific bay where she'd run to him. I thought about the fact that the world is very large and very small, simultaneously depending on which threads you follow. I think, he said carefully, that some situations accumulate enough pressure that they eventually find the nearest available crack. We were both cracks in the same wall. A pause. Then she said, that might be the least romantic description of meeting someone I've ever heard. He almost laughed. Almost. I wasn't going for romantic. I know. That's what made it almost work. She let the moment settle. Saturday, 7. I'll be there. She hung up. Cole stood in his shop with his phone in his greasy hand and the Ford Escape still unsolved on the lift, and the smell of motor oil and the buzzing of a fluorescent light. He'd replaced the others, but not this one yet. And he thought about the particular way life accumulates meaning, not through the things you planned, but through the things you did when the plan fell apart. He'd built this life as a kind of shelter, not from the world. He wasn't naive enough to believe he could shelter from the world, but from the version of himself that the previous life had been making. The operator, the asset, the man who was most alive in situations that required him to be most dangerous. He'd chosen the shop and the towing yard and the early mornings and the problem-solving of engines and the specific small satisfaction of making broken things run again because those things required him to be present and patient and engaged in ways that the other life had not. He hadn't stopped being the other man. He'd just decided which version to lead with. His daughter came through the shop door at 7:15, still carrying her architecture studio bag, the large flat one she'd been carting back and forth to DePaul since September. She looked at the Escape on the lift and then at her father leaning against the bench doing nothing, which was unusual enough to make her pause. You okay? She said. Fine. You're just standing there. Thinking. She put the bag down on the chair near the tool cabinet and got a bottle of water from the small fridge in the corner. About what? About decisions. He looked at her. She was 19 and had her mother's eyes and her father's particular quality of stillness when she was listening, and she was going to be very good at architecture because she understood structures, not just physical ones. You ever wonder about the decisions that got you to where you are? The ones that didn't seem like decisions at the time? Just things that happened? She thought about it. Not the quick response of someone humoring the question, but actual thought. Sometimes. Why? Just the math of it. How one thing connects to the next. She studied him. This is about the woman from last week. It's a broader observation. It's about the woman from last week. She wasn't accusing, she was just reading him correctly, as she usually did, which he had always found both comforting and faintly unsettling. Dad, is she good? He thought about Isabella Sterling, standing in a parking garage with her mascara destroyed and her feet bleeding and choosing a stranger because the stranger was all she had left. Standing in a boardroom at 2 in the morning, talking a room of skeptical people through the truth with her hands steady and her voice flat and a slight tremble in her right hand that she steadied and didn't apologize for. Reading a report that criticized her and choosing not to soften a single word of it for public release. Yeah, he said. She's good. His daughter nodded, satisfied with the calibration. Then stop thinking so hard about it. She picked up her bag. Are you cooking or am I ordering? I'll cook. Don't make the thing with the mushrooms again. It was fine, but you made it 3 times last month. It's a good recipe. It's a fine recipe. There's a difference. She headed for the stairs. 40 minutes or I'm ordering Thai. He watched her go, the particular loose efficiency of a young person who hasn't yet learned to be self-conscious about how they move through the spaces they inhabit. His daughter. The thing he'd chosen over a case and never, not once, not even on the worst days, regretted choosing. He turned back to the escape, got the diagnostic running again. Found the issue 12 minutes later. A wheel bearing going on the left front, which would in fact make a weird noise when you turned left. Simple, clean, solvable. He ordered the part. Saturday came the way Saturdays do, unhurried, carrying its own specific quality of light, different from weekdays in a way that's hard to articulate but is real. Cole closed the shop at 4 and went upstairs and showered and stood in front of the small section of closet that contained clothing that was not for work. He didn't own much in that category. He found something that worked. His daughter, passing in the hallway, looked at him and said, "Good," which he accepted as sufficient. He drove to Randolph Street at 6:50. Isabella was already there, standing outside the restaurant, because she was the kind of person who was early to things and had probably been standing there since 6:45. She was wearing something simple, dark pants, a jacket, her hair down in a way he hadn't seen before, always pulled back during the days they'd worked together. She looked like a person who was not currently in crisis, which was an improvement on their previous interactions, and also, Cole registered, something worth paying attention to in its own right. She saw him coming from half a block away, and something in her posture changed. Not dramatically, just the specific small adjustment of someone who had been slightly tensed about a thing and has now confirmed the thing is not going to go badly. "You're early," she said. "You're earlier." "I'm always early." "It's a problem." "It's not a problem." She looked at him for a moment. The street around them was doing its Saturday evening thing. People, noise, the particular energy of a city putting on its weekend face. They were just 2 people outside a restaurant, ordinary in every external respect, which was, Cole thought, exactly right. "I have something to tell you," she said, "before we go in." "Okay." "I talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office today. They're requesting your involvement in the Betrayal prosecution, not as a witness, as a consultant. The request came from the lead prosecutor directly." She watched his face. She specifically said she needed someone who understood the original task force architecture, and that there's no one else who has both the clearance history and the direct knowledge of how the Harrow network was structured. Cole was quiet for a moment. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "Do you? You're going to say you'll consult independently, that you'll give them what they need and then go back to the shop, that you know what you're choosing. That's exactly what I'm going to say." "I know." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I'm telling you because you should know, and because—" She paused, choosing the words with the care she always applied to things that mattered. "Because the people who get to decide what they keep and what they let go of are the ones who actually thought about it, not the ones who just said yes to whatever came next." She looked at him. "You're one of those people. I wanted you to know I see that." The city kept moving around them. Cole stood on a sidewalk in Chicago on a Saturday evening and thought about what it costs to build a life that fits you correctly, and how you never fully understand the cost until someone outside the construction looks at it and says, "Yes, that's the shape of it. That's what you built." "You want to go eat?" he said. "Yes?" She reached over and her fingers found his. Not clutching, not urgent, just the simple, deliberate weight of a hand choosing another hand. "I'm starving, actually. I forgot to eat lunch." You forgot to eat lunch. I was in 8 consecutive meetings. That's not an excuse. It's an accurate description of why it happened. You should eat lunch. I know. You can tell me that inside. She nodded toward the door. They went in. And that was the thing about it, about all of it, the whole long unwinding of those days, that it didn't end with anything enormous. It ended with 2 people walking into a restaurant on a Saturday because they were hungry, and because, after everything that had happened, the simple, ordinary forward motion of a life that still had good things in it was the only thing worth walking toward. People make choices they can't see the shape of until years later. Marcus Fenn chose to be thorough even when he was afraid, and that thoroughness survived him. Dylan Cross chose, finally, at the end of 9 years, to be the person his daughter thought he was. Cole Mercer chose, twice, first in 2018, and again in a parking garage at midnight, to be present when it cost him something to be present. And Isabella Sterling chose, when it would have been easier and legally safer and professionally cleaner to simply survive the conspiracy rather than expose it, to tell the truth about what she'd found and to keep telling it until someone listened. None of them were heroic in the clean, cinematic sense. They were flawed and tired and scared and imperfect in the ways that actual people are imperfect, which is the only way anything real ever gets done. The restaurant was warm. The food, it turned out, was good. The board member's recommendation, which Isabella would have to acknowledge, had been accurate, which was a mildly irritating data point given her ongoing evaluation of that board member's judgment. She told Cole this, and he said he thought she should probably give partial credit at least. And she said she was giving precisely the amount of credit the situation warranted, and he said that sounded right. And they ate their dinner while the city moved outside the window in all its ordinary complexity, carrying its damage and its beauty simultaneously, the way cities do, the way lives do, the way everything worth paying attention to always does.